In today's video, we're going to talk about what it's like to smoke cannabis on LSD, what it's like to smoke cannabis on psilocybin, and how my use of these two psychedelics has forever altered my relationship with cannabis. All in today's video. Stay tuned. The first thing that comes to mind when I reflect on my experiences smoking cannabis on LSD is a few things, really. The first is a major mistake I'm sure a lot of people make who enjoy cannabis and maybe even enjoy psychedelics, and that is to retreat from uncomfortable feelings on an LSD experience by smoking cannabis. Many people who smoke cannabis habitually, such as myself, have kind of accustomed themselves to this muscle memory routine of going to a joint or going to a bong as a sort of ritual to calm them or ease their anxieties. This sometimes is a major, major mistake on LSD, and that is because LSD has its trademark characteristic. I believe it was once described as a non-specific mental amplifier. Now, if you imagine what a non-specific mental amplifier may do in a cannabis experience, you might imagine that certain cannabis effects are exaggerated, such as paranoia, even uncomfortable body feelings like dry mouth, and maybe just mild anxiety. You have to consider that some of these more subtle attributes of a cannabis experience can suddenly become the forefront of your mental experience when combined with LSD. So that is absolutely something that you want to consider. Another strange attribute is its ability to accelerate the loops that you might be falling into on LSD. And you can fall into some pretty strange cannabis LSD loops where you actually do the action I was mentioning previously, where you attempt to continually self comfort yourself on this overstimulated LSD experience with cannabis, which actually makes you want more cannabis, which is only spiraling you further and further and further into a very, very diluted, almost psychotic headspace. And this can be very pleasurable. I don't want to make it seem like this is a guaranteed bad experience after you do it. It's just that you need to understand that if you don't like the experience of cannabis already, stay far, far away from combining these two together. Another problem if you use marijuana ritualistically on LSD is that you may fall into a loop where you just continue to do so. Despite the fact that I do not want to continue to smoke weed, the loop of the LSD trip has suddenly put me in this continual pattern of loading a bowl and breathing it in and loading a bowl and breathing it in, almost like I'm a machine. It's like, am I a man or am I a machine? I don't know anymore on LSD. So beware of that, because each hit you take in is just going to continue to amplify and amplify all of these effects. And I suspect that one of the reasons that cannabis facilitates these very powerful loops has to do with cannabis's ability to dull the memory. Cannabis, for me at least, really, really affects my short-term memory while I'm under the influence of it. And so when you start slicing bits of short-term memory out of the picture, when you're already in this hyper-stimulated state of LSD, you're pretty much asking yourself to lose your mind a little bit, because what will happen is you'll forget what you just did. I've sat maybe for an hour before trying to actually continue to smoke cannabis on LSD and being unable to because I just cannot remember what I am trying to do. And this can happen on cannabis as well. You can basically end up like the black guy from Get Out if you smoke too much potent weed. But it's a bit different on LSD. It's actually, no, it's very different. There is a difference between smoking sativa or indica on LSD. I've noticed that smoking a sativa seems to give much more sporadically paranoid racing kind of thoughts, and an indica makes me much more aware of my body. It's not that I feel tired or sedated as I normally might on an indica, but I suddenly, I probably could do like a really good body scanning meditation, you might say. The LSD cannabis combination, if it doesn't go the wrong direction, is probably a maximum state of creativity. Your thought process is so complex. It is going off in 300 different directions. And maybe that doesn't help productivity, but in terms of generating new ideas and thinking of things you never would have thought of before, that would be the time to do it. I felt like connections that had never even approached each other were connecting. And that already happens on LSD, so you can imagine what it feels like on cannabis. It's definitely worth noting that smoking cannabis in the beginning of an LSD trip is probably going to accelerate how fast the LSD trip comes on. It's going to accelerate how strong the LSD trip feels and probably what it looks like. So just be ready for that roller coaster to go a lot faster than you're typically used to. Are you looking for like-minded friends? Join my Discord, link in the description below, to a community of over 10,000 psychonauts. I'll see you in there. All right, now enough of LSD and cannabis. Let's talk about psilocybin and cannabis. Why is it different? And in what ways is it different? I think to start, the reason that the relationship between cannabis and psilocybin is different for the most part is because psilocybin is a lot less stimulating than LSD in my experience. The teeth chattering, the clenching, the muscle tension, none of that really carries over into my psilocybin experiences, and so that of course is going to paint the combination with cannabis a lot different. Um, Psilocybin can actually be sort of tiring. It can even make you sleepy. Many people yawn. I've noticed that this dreamy, relaxing feeling that psilocybin mushrooms kind of bring over me, this lightness and this tingliness, sometimes goes very well with cannabis, and sometimes it doesn't. I want to say as well. It might just be my own experience, but cannabis doesn't propel me into insanity when I'm on psilocybin. It actually just propels me into, well, maybe it does propel me into insanity, but a different type of insanity, a better type of insanity, a type of insanity that doesn't feel so high strung and paranoid. The relaxation that cannabis gives me allows me to fully surrender into the psilocybin experience quite often and just be taken away in this stream of thought and consciousness. And I find that very therapeutic. I really enjoy just being basically feels like elevated to the abstract layer and just getting to play around there without too many thoughts about what exactly is necessarily going on in the physical world around me. If I smoke cannabis on psilocybin and I'm not laying down and being reflective, then maybe I could get a little bit anxious because there can be a lot of overstimulation associated feelings that come on psilocybin that cannabis isn't really going to help you out with because cannabis can cause a lot of anxiety as well. There's kind of a weird effect too if you take a really high dose of mushrooms where, like LSD, you don't even feel like you're smoking. I really just don't know how to say it besides that, where I could go to my desk and I could continue to smoke as much as I want while I'm on 5 grams of mushrooms, but sometimes you just don't feel it. It's like you're numb. And when you're numb to it, it's a weird sensation because you keep breathing it in and you keep breathing it in and you're not feeling anything. And so you start to wonder like, oh, is the mushrooms overpowering it? Like what is going on here? And then all of a sudden, before you know it, you're just swept away. I personally don't mind smoking cannabis in the beginning, middle, or end of a psilocybin trip, and that just has to do with my own relationship with this synergy between these two things. I find that in the beginning of a trip, it helps calm come up anxiety, it helps calm all of the nerves that I have associated with nausea or anything like that. I find that in the middle of an experience, while like LSD, it does amplify it, it doesn't amplify it in the same way. I might loop and I might spiral out of control, you may say, but it's not in this anxious, paranoid frame of mind. That doesn't mean it can't happen to you. That's just what happened to me. Now, at the end of a psilocybin experience, I love smoking cannabis because I already find smoking cannabis so enjoyable that, you know, as you're coming down from mushrooms and you're tired and you just feel like you got beat up, but you feel so healed and rejuvenated, what's better than smoking a little bit of weed, man? But that's just me. I'm just a big old stoner in Washington State over here. I think that both of these combinations can have a lot of value for anybody in pursuit of a spiritual, meditative, or just self reflective journey, but I think that they have a lot of perils as well. I think that combining LSD and cannabis can really, really not be a safe decision for a lot of individuals. And that is not because it's a physically unsafe decision, but it may be a very psychologically unsafe decision for those who are not prepared for it. Now, this also applies to psilocybin and cannabis as well, but in my own experience, I was able to tolerate psilocybin and cannabis better. So that's what I have to say about it. And now I want to talk about how my relationship with cannabis has actually changed since trying both of these psychedelics. It wasn't really until I started actually taking more LSD that I noticed this transformation in my relationship with cannabis. It's really tricky to put words around because it's almost as if cannabis is a psychedelic mimic, you may say. Cannabis has this ability, you may think of the Pokemon Ditto, that can kind of turn into any Pokemon. That's sort of what it's begun to happen for me. And so, in which ways has this happened? Well, for starters, every single time that I smoke cannabis now, I have mild wavy visuals. What the hell is up with that? It's like I have these LSD-esque visual distortions that occur, especially at nighttime or when looking at any type of a popcorn ceiling or pattern ceiling, that just directly remind me of LSD. And maybe this is actually the root of these myths about how LSD gets in the spine and causes these crazy flashbacks and things like that. Because cannabis, for whatever reason, which probably was smoked by the same generation where that myth formed, cannabis can bring this back. How strange. I really was skeptical at first. You wonder always, like, am I just kind of trying to see a visual? Am I just, but no, this is undoubtable. This has been going on now for, I mean, really, honestly, since I kind of started taking LSD. And that's where I'm curious, because I've been perusing Reddit threads and trying to read about if people have had this initiated by psilocybin mushrooms, but I have not. So I'm thinking maybe it was the frequency that I was doing psilocybin and the doses that kept me from, for whatever reason, having this effect overlapping onto my cannabis. But the moment that I started trying LSD, pretty much from the first time, cannabis was like never the same. It feels a lot more, first of all, it just feels a lot more powerful. And this is pretty easy to control as well, because I go to the same dispensary and pretty much always have. But for some reason now, cannabis just hits me a lot more potently. And when it hits me more potently, it sometimes brings me back to this very meditative headspace, this very psychedelic-like headspace. I don't know what to make of this, and I don't know what the actual reason is that this could happen, because I really didn't wish this to happen. I don't want to be somebody who eventually is saying they have HPPD or whatever, and it doesn't overlay in my day consistently. It's just every time I smoke cannabis, it's like, hey, remember that time that the wall looked wavy on LSD? Now everything looks like that. So I'm just like, okay. And so I guess one of my personal questions to myself would be, was this always there and I just wasn't noticing it? Like, did LSD make me a lot more aware and now I'm just noticing it in the cannabis? But that doesn't seem rational. That doesn't seem to be the case. I certainly would have noticed these types of visuals. I don't know what the explanation is, but I'm fascinated by it. It's like cannabis has taken on a new role in my life. I could smoke, you know, not very much, and I'm just there, you know? Like, I just feel like I'm there. It's like this glimmering of my former experience that is encapsulated every time I smoke cannabis again. And it's not that I'm chasing this whatsoever. I really don't. I don't have a wish to keep replicating my LSD experience, but I can't help but notice that even some of the same pattern matching habits that I have, say when I look at tree branches or other environmental phenomenon, come back on cannabis. So that's interesting. It's almost like new neural pathways of viewing the world are being maybe reinforced on my cannabis experiences or something like that. There's something about the way that I perceive the world that has been saved and carried over to my cannabis experiences now. And I'll probably have to make another video about this because I'm still at the beginning of experiencing this. But I want to say now that there's absolutely a modification to the cannabis experience with continued psychedelic use for me. Maybe not for every individual, but psychedelic use specifically altered my cannabis experience. All right, that's going to bring an end to my video where I talked about what cannabis on LSD is like, what cannabis on psilocybin is like, and how my relationship with cannabis has changed since doing both of those. Thank you guys so much for watching this video. Please like and subscribe if you enjoyed it, and I'll see you next time. It is an honor comparable to that of the angels. It is the gift of all mankind. It is the stone of legends. And I shall read it right now. We also now have a community art marketplace where 80% of all revenue goes directly to the artists that you support. Link in the description below to that as well. You know I could never forget about the Patreon list. Here we go. Alfredo Garbanzo, Adam Sornat, Alex Miser, Alpha Disconnect, Anti-Miko Makinen, Ashkor Draxon, Ben, Billy Gillis, Blue Dog Music, Caleb Talaxon, Cameron Plourde, Chicks, Choosey, Chris Chapin, Chris Liver, Connor Nelson, The Happy Hour Show, DeAndre Jamal, Daniel Shiner, Danny Cameron, Dendare Lotus, Devin Hall, Dylan Brown, Eric Sear, Fishy, Jedi Manos, Helvetia, Irate Llama, Jack Donahue, Jake Hall, Jeremy Schroeder, Jeremy Sorrell, Josh Farrell, Justin Boudreau, Karenda, Kelvin, King Ragnar, Lassie, Leron, Chandy, Big breath, Lithium Blodwyn, Louis Le Louis, Lucky, Lynn Norton, Mate Orr, Mia Valentine, Miguel Navarro, Mike King, Mohiyidine Cheikh, Morty, Night Slayer Bot, Ower Mcleod,
Pineapple Dan, Professor, Quintins, can't say that, Rainbow, Rakaya Benoit, Robbie, Royan, Ryan Allen, Sarah Chapagain, Sebastian Reisinger, Secular Shaman, Sierra Butler, Sir Pugsley, Serena Sedegi, Sponabeer, Steven, Surfs Up Tom, Tatum Scott, The Gaming Guy, 3-Pounder, Toxic Player, Tyler, Voyager, Zachary David, or Zachary Daniel, Zebediah, Connor McGregor, Cub, Fenn, Christopher Boyce Jr., James Campbell, Huea, Shooting Star, Phoebe, new patrons, Zach Bean, Yesh Reuven, Corey Sloan, Josh, and Dangwin. Thank you all so much. You are the core of this channel.